Good afternoon. Today's talk is going to be about active learning and classroom flipping and some of the things that I've introduced into my teaching over the last 6 years, sort of little by little, which kind of started out as a sort of conventional style of lecturing to now exclusively this active learning classroom flipped style, and I never plan on going back to the original style. And many of you will go on in careers in teaching, or at least if you don't right out of grad school or postdoc, many of you will be teaching in some other form in, for example, extension schools or even at your workplaces, teaching tutorials and so on. So this talk is motivated by a recognition that professors aren't taught to teach and often don't even really realize that there's a whole body of literature on how people learn effectively. And this has been sort of the butt of jokes for almost 100 years or longer. Lecturing is that mysterious process by means of which the contents of the notebook of the professor are transferred through the instrument of the fountain pen to the notebook of the student while passing through the mind of either. Edwin Emery Slauson, 1927. So the first time I heard this quote or something very similar to it was in graduate school. Probably about 2005, I saw a talk by Professor Eric Mazur, who's a professor of physics at Harvard, who studies nanophotonics and other topics. And he was one of the founders of a style of teaching called peer learning. And he has many peer-reviewed papers on peer learning, and you can go on YouTube and find many of his talks. This one, Confessions of a Converted Lecturer, is particularly good and sort of goes through his whole approach and the history of how he came to teach in this manner. And the idea in peer learning is that you assign pre-reading and homework. So you assign the reading before the students come to class, to be done before the students come to class. You collect the homework at the start of class, and you conduct a series of questions and answers, possibly using clickers or some way of assessing whether or not the students have picked up the knowledge you intend them to. If you take surveys of answers before and after, students have an opportunity. You assess the knowledge shortly after you put up the question. Then you have the students confer with each other in small teams or with their neighbors, and then you reassess the class. And like magic, the average correct response increases. So by the logic of truth, by the power of logic and truth, those students who have the correct answer successfully, more often than not, convince their peers what the correct answer is. And this is shown over and over again. And the hypothesis by which peer learning works is that students are better teachers than the professor because they just learned it. So if you just learn a topic, you know where the pitfalls are, and you can explain it to your peers better than the professor can, who has been maybe studying this topic for 30 years. And that's the hypothesis. I was initially skeptical of this. It took me about 11 years to overcome my skepticism of this approach, because one, I believed it was really hard to decouple the effects. How much of the improved educational outcomes were due to the fact that the students all came in doing the reading before class, which everyone can agree is a good thing to do, although it's basically never done. When I was a student, even though I knew it was a good thing to do, I didn't do it. There's too much in the book. So how often in a class do you take the 700-page textbook and you have 10 weeks and 70 pages a week, 22 pages a class, how often do you actually cover all that stuff? There's way more in the textbook than you can possibly cover in a 10-week or 15-week class for most subjects and most books. So perhaps the textbook is better as a reference than as pre-reading. It also assumes, which breaks my heart, that lecturing is not useful at all. In that the idea is that lecture is just a performance art, and it's the model is the sage on stage, where the professor just talks, and the students kind of write down without being mindful of what they're writing and without comprehending, because as soon as the professor's done with one topic, they move on to the next slide or equation or whatever, and you're like, what on earth just happened? But is that throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, to use a really bizarre analogy that I never quite understood? Are there good parts of a lecture that, like the ability to engage with students and look students directly in the eye and try to inspire them to be an example of somebody who has mastered the topic? Those are potentially good reasons to have somebody up in front of the class talking. So my solution to this, and this is not something that originated with me, it's done, a lot of people have done this, and that is to record their own lectures and to use the recorded lectures as the pre-reading, as kind of a video textbook. So it retains, in my opinion, the best part of the lecture format, which is having an actual human being explaining and drawing figures and explaining equations step by step, and so forth. And it also, using the power of technology, allows you to pause and go back and so forth. I mean, if only we could do that with any time somebody was talking to us and we wanted to make sure we knew what they were saying. It also allows active learning approaches. So these are strategies that can be used during class that get out of the standard mode of students just copying in their notebook what's on the board, which is basically what's in the professor's notebook. Interestingly, this is an advertisement for a talk that occurred an hour ago on the UCSD campus, because one of the leaders of the active learning movement is Dr. Carl Wyman, and he wrote this excellent book on the topic, Improving How Universities Teach Science, which is basically kind of like a book-length lab report on a grant that he and his collaborators got on implementing active learning approaches at University of British Columbia and University of Colorado Boulder. I highly recommend this book if you're interested in this topic. Okay, we throw around a lot of nomenclature in this field. Active learning, what is active learning? Active learning is adopting a practice whereby students have the opportunity to comprehend and apply the material during class when there is someone there, like peers, TAs, and the instructor to coach them. The concept of a flipped classroom, I didn't even really understand until like a week ago what this word actually was intended to mean. And it's based on the idea that learning has two phases: the transfer of information, which is relatively easy to accomplish, and the comprehension of information, which is hard. So anybody can just say F equals MA, but what does that really mean? So the F equals MA is the transfer, and comprehension is the hard part. So traditional STEM courses do the transfer in class. So in class is high value time. That's the time when the students are with their peers, the professor is in the room, or the instructor is in the room, and the TAs are in the room. That's the highest value time that you can possibly have in the university framework. So if we do the easy part, which is the transfer of knowledge in class, we're wasting high-value time with all of these potential human resources that can help us understand it. Flipping puts the transfer step before the class. So time at home is low-value time when you can watch a video or read a book and you're not really the clock isn't ticking in the sense that you only have 50 minutes with your peers and with the TAs and with the instructor. So it's flipped in the sense that you put the transfer step before the class, and class time, which again is the high value time, the professor's role is the coach, and you have an opportunity as students to learn from classmates. Peer instruction is the third bit of nomenclature, and peer instruction is based, again, on the hypothesis that peers understand the difficulties because they just learned it and are therefore better at teaching it. So my history with this topic started when I went to Professor Mazur's talk, and then flash forward about 6 years later when I was applying for my job here and other universities. And I wanted to show the hiring committees that I knew something about teaching, or that I was at least aware that there were other methods of teaching other than conventional lecturing. So I wrote about active learning concepts in my teaching statement and in my job talks. I didn't quite know how I was going to implement it, and my approach was gradual. So I tried to implement it in my second year in my grad class. That's the course I teach, Intermolecular and Surface Forces. And the idea was that I tried to make the reading mandatory. And I had quizzes on the reading before I talked about any of the reading. So this was like the traditional flipped classroom approach, using a book as the pre-class assignment. And voila, you know, it worked. It didn't. I got this email from a student, and I reproduced it here with permission. I had a thought about the course. As it stands, we read Chapter X before Class X on the content of the chapter. That makes it difficult to pick out what's most important, i.e. what you emphasize in class in the chapter. In my opinion, I think I would learn the material better if we read the chapter after the class on the chapter. Then again, that might have some disadvantages. So this is probably the reaction that every single student in the class had, because who wants to get a quiz on the mandatory reading? And also because if you're used to things happening one way, and then the classroom is flipped and you're not really explaining why you're doing what you're doing or what the advantage is, you get a lot of backlash. And the student is right to criticize this approach in this way. And then, as was this in my younger days, I responded to things in essay form. So I wrote this really long response explaining basically why I was doing what we were doing. And this is basically a recap of what I've been saying. So if you do the reading first, you get more out of the lecture. If you go to the lecture first, you get more out of the reading. The difference between the book and the lecture is that you can read the book anytime you want, and the lecture only occurs once. If one doesn't read before coming to class, the opportunity to use the lecture for depth and discussion is wasted because there isn't enough time for the material to sink in if one sees it in the lecture for the first time. This effect is well known in the literature and is known to essentially all other fields of education except for the STEM fields, and within STEM except for computer science, which generally has always used a flipped classroom approach. No business, law, history, or English class would ever assign the case or chapter after the lecture. So the idea was, well, I'm just saying, well, there must be something wrong with math and science and engineering students to not get that this is better, even though I never had a flipped classroom, and my only experience with clickers as an undergrad was completely haphazard. So the professor would put up a question, you had 0 time to think about it or confer with anybody, and you just voted on the answer. Now, what kind of educational opportunity could possibly exist in that? So that's really an example of using something that looks like technology in the classroom, but using it completely inappropriately. Okay. But then videos. Videos are way better than the book. The book is a great reference. The book is a great place to learn in more depth. The book also has a different approach. It was written by a different author than the professor, usually. If it isn't, there's probably some conflict of interest there, but anyway, if it's a different author, sometimes it's beneficial to have everything in one place. Also, the book is something that you can carry on with you as a professional engineer or scientist. Videos are more fun than textbooks. Traditional lecture, it's hard to listen and comprehend at the same time, and with a video, students can rewatch, speed up, go back and forth quickly. You can speed up the video using the gear icon. It took me a long time to figure out that that option was available. Something that you're laughing at me now, but this one maybe not everybody knows. You can also use J, K, and L to go back a few seconds or forward a few seconds or pause, which is really helpful when watching educational material. So like, oh, I missed that, J, J, J. Oh, I know this, L, 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 and so forth. But there's a large initial cost because you have to produce the videos or you have to find the videos that somebody else made that are like exactly what you want to teach. So I would really advocate doing this yourself beforehand. Also, if you're going to record the lecture, you want to get it right on one try. You don't want errors in your videos, and you don't want to have to edit videos. So one of the ways to do this is to not do any flipped classroom stuff and just record the videos one year and use those as the basis for a flipped classroom the following year. But there's still something to be gained in the first year by posting the lectures, because then the students can go back and watch them. Find a room where the whole board is visible, or use a screencast like an iPad that you can write on, and ask the TA to record the lecture if you'll be walking around, or do what I'm doing for this lecture right now and controlling the video camera from my phone. I didn't have to do that, but it saves having to clip at the beginning of the video. What's the equipment list? And I'm not endorsing any particular brand here, but a not pro model 4K camcorder was good. Also, these wireless mics are good. I have one right now. Some rooms have very poor video. They have interference with the wireless signal. So in that case, the no-nonsense approach is to record the audio separately and then paste it into the video. For software, try to avoid having to edit if possible, because if you have an HD or worse, a 4K video, it can take like 5 hours to compress a 50 or 80-minute lecture. And so that's if you just have to splice in one little bit and you have to resave it, it takes forever. So it really benefits you to use some tricks to avoid trying to edit. You can clip videos using QuickTime. But you can do more sophisticated edits using preloaded software. Like if you have a Mac, you could use iMovie and then upload on YouTube. And as a backup, creators can download their own content on YouTube. You can't download somebody else's content on YouTube, but you can download your own. But you'll want to check with your institution to see if it's possible to post these videos publicly, or if you have to restrict access somehow. Video files are big. It helps to have storage for them. So I have my courses as playlists on my YouTube channel, and I have secondary backup on an external hard drive. Okay, so what does one do in a typical class period? So course announcements. There's a temptation to summarize what was in the video, and I think this is a bad idea. And the reason it's a bad idea is because it discourages watching the video. If you come in and you spend the first 10 minutes talking about what was in the video, it's like, oh, why bother with the video? I mean, you know, it took the professor a really long time to write the equations. Why don't I just get the same information in 10 minutes at the beginning of class? So what we do is basically the equivalent of Eric Mazur's flipped classroom, where you put up problems. And these problems have to be a particular type of problem. They can't be long calculations, because long calculations require access to tables and calculators and sometimes MATLAB to solve integrals and so on. So you should leave those problems for the homework. And then in class, you talk about the things that you want the students to remember forever. So you put up the problem, then you give 2 to 5 minutes of individual time and encourage students to write down solutions. Then give the same amount of time to discuss with assigned teammates. So in doing this, I've done both assigning random teams, which the students didn't like, no surprise, and having students pick their own teams, which was a lot better. Now, granted, professional engineers don't always get to pick their teammates, but in class it tends to be a little more fun to allow them to do that. So you go through the solutions after having this time with the teams, and then take questions after going through the solutions. So during these steps, you can walk up and down the aisles, and this is a really important part because the instructor and the TA and undergraduate coaches, so oftentimes undergrads who took the classes in previous years are hired as coaches to interact with students and try to understand the location or the aspects of the problems that are the most problematic problems. So in a typical class, we go through about 4 to 5 questions per class period, and these questions are derived in large part from old homework problems and old exams. If the course is being taught for the first time, all of these problems have to be developed de novo. For classes like intro physics, intro chemistry, there are large deposits of good questions that can be downloaded via something called the internet. So approximately once per week, collect written answers, and this keeps everybody honest, keeps everybody showing up and participating and watching the videos. These I have been using, the written answers have been collecting as a 2-stage quiz. The 2-stage quiz means first students try it individually, and then the version that gets turned in is done collaboratively with the teammates. I'm not down for clickers, and this could just be a deficiency on my part, because clickers always mean multiple choice, and that means that you could just guess. Also, I'm a Luddite, which means I'm afraid of technology, or maybe it means that I'm ignorant of technology. I don't remember. And there are too many moving parts. Like if I had to go back to my laptop, to the class, to the notes, there'd just be a lot going on. Also, kind of bugs me that one company has a monopoly on this. Anyway, okay. What is a side-by-side comparison? Like over the last few years of incorporating these aspects into my teaching, what have I learned? So in a conventional lecture versus a flipped classroom plus video, so there's a moderate initial investment. So at the beginning, when you teach a new class for the first time, you have to read the book a few times, or maybe it's a course you know well enough to just whole cloth come up with the notes for a whole 10 weeks or 15 weeks, but that's really hard to do. But that investment is big, but compared to flipped classroom, it's pretty moderate. You have to do the notes, the homework, the exams. For a flipped classroom, there's a high initial investment. You have to do the notes for the videos. You have to make the homework problems. You have to make the exams. You also have to make the videos. And you also have to make basically a second set of lecture notes, which are the in-class problems. Okay, so far conventional lecture is winning, at least from the standpoint of the instructor. Conventional lecture, however, has a large continual investment that is relearning the lecture every year, because believe it or not, professors don't use what they teach in their professional lives every single day of the year. So when they teach it again, they have to relearn, if not, maybe I'll just speak for myself. But I have to relearn hard derivations every year. I have to learn where that pesky factor of 2 came from, which I'm always asked about in whatever class and whatever equation. It's always a factor of 2. In a flipped classroom, there's a small continual investment. So you already recorded the lectures. You already recorded those hard derivations. So just let the students watch what you recorded already. The preparation for a conventional lecture is stressful. So the nights before, it might look, I don't know, maybe this only applies to instructors who care about teaching, but I get really nervous the day before a lecture. And that's problematic because lectures happen 30 times per quarter for a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. And that can be pretty stressful because you basically have to memorize this whole script of what you're going to say. Flipped classroom allows for a peaceful preparation. Conventional lectures are exhilarating for the instructor, especially if there's some aspect of performance, or if you like some aspect of performance art, which I do. So conventional lectures are exhilarating. I mean, teaching the Derjaguin approximation every year, I just get a rush from that. But whereas teaching problems and walking up and down the aisles is kind of meh. Memorize multi-step derivations every year. Do it once and get on to more important things. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have it memorized. Dry erase fumes and chalk dust inhalation is a huge risk for conventional lectures. This is all true of TA sections as well. You can run your TA section any way you want in most classes. So this is all true for TA sections as well, except that the regular lecture takes the place of the video. Reduced exposure to fumes and chalk dust. Most importantly, though, this is all true, and this is from the standpoint of me, but who cares about me? Really, though, it is much better for the students. So a conventional lecture is hard to follow, can't stop and start. A live lecture and your brain's generally not engaged. I mean, you can be motivated by even some really charismatic lecturer that knows a lot about what they're talking about, but can you really absorb it and comprehend it and be able to apply it just by listening to somebody talk? I would argue that most people can't do that. I definitely couldn't do that as a student. Students seem to like the flipped classroom better if there's a video and have better retention and mastery of the topic. There is some controversial stuff here. We'll have time for discussion in a bit. How about the role of the textbook? Do we jettison the textbook if we're just going to have a video? I would argue no, we should have the textbook. I haven't figured out the right solution to this. A textbook seems necessary for completeness, and I believe that a professional scientist or engineer should have a book for reference later. I often get emails from students that want to know what book we used because they either never bought it or sold it, and now they have a job where they need it. This is actually something that happens quite often. But assigning the reading plus the video can be a burden. It would be a huge burden. I mean, read the chapter and watch the video. Some students will read anyway. Possible solutions are to get copyright permissions for a reduced course reader. So if you curate the book, since a book is usually too long for a 1 quarter or 1 semester class, that can help you narrow down what the most important aspects are. Or pick a book to which your university has an electronic license, so the students can just download it and don't have to spend all that money for a book that is not going to be used necessarily as the basis of the class. Put the book on reserve. You should do this no matter what. Make it optional. This didn't work so well in years where I made the book optional. Good students will appreciate having it available if the scope of the material needed for exams is clearly delineated. So one problem with textbooks is that students will assume that if some chapter is assigned, they're responsible for everything in that chapter, which is really stressful. So when teaching, you want to make the expectations for the exams as transparent as possible. So the book will help and give depth, and it's all important, but it might not necessarily be on the exam, and there's a difference between what you want the students to learn for the exams, which may be some level of competency, but the students that want to pursue that topic for future work, or even so in research or professionally, they will want to know it with as much depth as possible, so they can be competitive in the job market. What is the role of homework and exams in a flipped classroom? So because the students have to watch the videos, be wary of overburdening with homework. Students already have to watch and or read at home. The distribution of content should be as follows. So in class, the in-class problems are generally conceptual. Those are really the core nuggets that you want the students to go away with, the part of the class that changes their brain forever if they're conscientious and working in class. The homework is where you teach the practical aspects, so how to use these concepts in calculations applied to real problems. I have collected homework first thing in class, and we feel the way we feel about these people, but sometimes students will just hand in the homework and you'll watch them walk out the door. Maybe we don't want them in our class anyway, who would be so brazen and rude, but it does happen, and our jobs are to help students learn, even the students who may be resistant to learning or think that they can do better on their own, which is not out of the question, but as we are going to try to help them, we might as well try to help them. So it's okay to give away secrets to the homework in class, as long as everybody gets the same secrets. Exams, one midterm exam for a 10-week course is fine because they're basically doing exams every single class, exam problems every single class. And once a week or so, they're collected, and a final exam. So remember that group exercises are turned in periodically, so we don't need over-reliance on the exams. Okay, what are some outcomes? So this is a problem. There's a large literature on peer learning, active learning, flipped classrooms, and it all basically points to the fact that these are good practices to adopt. But it doesn't. But it's very hard to do a good study on this because it's very hard to control all the variables as we want to do as professional researchers. But if we can consider for a moment that the plural of anecdote is data, I've actually used this phrase as both the plural of anecdote is not data and the plural of anecdote is data to prove whatever point I'm trying to in an argument. It's a good one. Students like the videos. Students tell me the exams are too easy, which I take as a good sign because I don't think they're any easier. It's just that they've had more experience doing problems and having interactions with their peers and the professor as a coach in class. So I take that to be the reason that the exams are perceived as being easier. And also I have to crank up the heat a little bit to keep my grade distribution similar, and yet I still get comments that the exams are easy. My recommend course ratings have improved, and who doesn't want that? Some of my students watching this are probably going to ding me just for saying that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. Are the students actually watching the videos? This is, when I said that I was going to do this, a lot of my colleagues said that the students won't watch the videos. Like, good luck with that. So we did this was the most recent possible data. So a self-reported anonymous survey. We got 79 responses out of 105 students. All 79 were in class that day, I believe. So this is certainly biased toward people who show up to class to begin with. But that being said, this was the distribution, and we had a lot of students responding in the high range, which is fantastic. And there's no reason to believe that there's a huge, there's really not much of an incentive to lie on this survey. I also told the students that they could write anywhere on the piece of paper that they wanted, so that they wouldn't know what their neighbor wrote. So okay. We have some anecdotes, so maybe the anecdotes together form some good data in support of this approach. Here are some examples of problems that I give out, or that I do in class. So here's a prompt, here's a solution, here's a prompt, and here's a solution. So this whole slide takes about 10 minutes to get through. So the prompt, they have individual time, in this case was about 2 minutes, then team time 2 minutes, then I go through the example, takes another 2 minutes, then I take questions, which could take 2 to 5 minutes. All right, here is another type of problem. In this case, I put down a hint that was sort of a partial solution to this problem. I felt that preparing for this, it would have been too much to expect getting this far without the hint. So here is the solution to this problem. Don't worry about it. And there's the solution to the next problem. And you can use these really high-tech animations, which involve putting white boxes over parts of the plots you want to reveal later. Oh, great. Okay, and so forth. All right, so what are some good practices and loose ends of this method? So what are the shoulds? It's really useful to take an inventory of knowledge at the beginning of any class, because unless everybody has the prereqs, so based on the number of exceptions to the prereqs that I end up assigning or rejecting at the beginning of every quarter, not everyone has the prereqs. So it's good to take an inventory of what the students have learned, especially in graduate education, where often people are joining departments from undergraduate programs with different requirements. So that is basic knowledge about the topic, so you can calibrate the level at which you're going to present the work. And this is actually a good thing to do, whether you're going to do a flipped classroom or a conventional lecture. Explain why you're doing what you're doing. If you just, say, oh, you think to yourself, oh, I went to this talk, or I read this paper, this book on something called the flipped classroom, I'm just going to incorporate these things into class that students have never seen before, and they may not respond very positively to it. So just tell them. Just tell the students. Don't review from the day before. It will disincentivize watching the videos. 2-stage quizzes are a good thing. Also, because there's some security and strength in numbers, if you're doing the problem with 2 other people, there's a much better chance that you'll get it right. Let students pick their own teams. Don't admonish students. Don't adopt an admonishing tone. The material is not easy. Otherwise, students wouldn't need to take the class. Try to find a classroom conducive to group work and coaching. This is really hard to do, but if it is possible, try to do it. And some challenges that I've had that I haven't quite figured out how to deal with are excused absences. So if there's a lot of group work that's going to be turned in, like 10 assignments a year, or if you're going to use clickers, maybe it could be every single day there could be assignments that are due, that is clicking in. So how do you deal with excused absence in a way that doesn't encourage students to give their clicker to somebody else? So students will have 2 clickers or more. Social anxiety, this is actually a big deal. Honestly, if I were a student and the professor said, we're going to do this new thing called a flipped classroom and you're going to have teams, I probably, as an 18-year-old, would have freaked out. I probably would have not wanted any part of this. I just would have wanted to sit in the back of the class or wherever in the class and just let the lecture go by, hope that it wasn't boring, and then read from the book and learn it that way. Because I tended to have a better relationship with the book than I did with the lecture. For how many people is that? Yeah, okay. Because most lectures, honestly, especially if they were PowerPoint, like PowerPoint lectures, complete waste of time, unless there's some image you have to show. So I can imagine aspects of biology. You need to have the screen up. You need to have the screen up in computer science, but not necessarily PowerPoint. But teaching physics or calculus or chemistry using PowerPoint is a complete waste. That is like, so there's a lot bigger difference in the inferiority between a PowerPoint lecture and a conventional chalk lecture than there is between a chalk lecture and a flipped classroom style lecture, in my opinion. Okay, so anyway, where was it? Social anxiety. Yes, this is a real thing, and you want to be sensitive somehow to the students who have not who are not down for teamwork in class. And to be honest, I don't have a good solution for this yet. Everything is online. And it's possible, because everything is online, it's possible to ace the exams without class. And the question is, are even the absolute top students still learning something using the flipped approach? Probably they are. Are they still capable of getting it by watching and rewatching and doing the homework, the videos, and never going to class? Probably they could still do well. And the question is, are we adding enough benefit in class? So I would argue that if we find that students can still have room for improvement by using the flipped approach in class, then we should do it. And one of the biggest barriers is that there are currently really no incentives for startup costs at the institutional level. So if a professor wants to do this, or a TA wants to do this in their sections, there is basically no support for innovating in teaching at most universities. And that is like, of course, there are centers for teaching and learning, which are fantastic and means of support. But I mean in terms of reduced loads to accommodate new approaches to teaching, because it does take time. The only way, honestly, I was able to do this is because I did it piecemeal over the years. I put aspects of this together, and that's really, if I was doing it all de novo this year, that's all I would be doing, and I'd be working many more than 40 hours a week doing it. So in conclusion, active learning is a continuum. If you're going on in education and you want to do this, you don't have to do it all at once. It's already practiced to some large extent by law, business, history, English, philosophy, and computer science. as well as art and music, and other fields as well, but generally not in math, physics, chemistry, engineering. Any active learning is better than a typical lecture as long as you're on the same page with the students and you don't completely, you don't do what I did, for example, at the beginning of my career when I introduced it. I introduced some fairly large changes while trying to retain a traditional lecture format, like giving out quizzes for the pre-reading, which was a horrible idea, without changing anything else. This is my hierarchy of how I feel the most successful structured classes are. So PowerPoint worse than Chalk Talk, pre-reading flipped is better than that, and video flipped is even better, but with the opportunity to do pre-reading as well for the students who want to. There's a big change. It really feels weird to walk into a class and have the students already know what the topic of the class is. It's really cool, but it's really weird at the beginning. There's a big initial investment. I think it's well worth the effort on the part of the instructor for the students, and I think it's better off, the instructors are better off in the long run, given the challenges of being an instructor. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Quick question on how you handle the Tuesdays quizzes that you mentioned. If you have a student work on the quiz for the first 2-3 minutes, and then the group work on it for the next however many minutes, and then you're going to go over the solution, and how do you collect and evaluate their answer if you already given out the solution on the spot?
Yeah, so the question is, how do I collect and evaluate? Because I'm not using clickers, which would be sort of probably the easiest way to do it. What I do is give out half sheets of paper and have the students write their names on the half sheets of paper. When we collect them, we give a quick check to verify that the same number of people written on the paper are the number of people who are in that group. Otherwise, you have the same problem as people coming to class with more than one clicker. And then I go through it. It's not the most streamlined process, honestly, but the judgment that I made is that the clickers are just a little bit too much. It's one extra aspect that I don't really want to deal with. So it does cost us about 2 minutes maybe per class to collect them, and then the TA or the grader will grade them. Yep. Yep.
So how long after making your videos do you feel that the videos will be relevant? Like, do you want your students watching the same video 30 years from now? Or?
That's a great question. The question is, how long will the videos be fresh? Do the videos have an expiration date? I think it would be really weird if I were 50 and having the students watch the lectures when I was 35. I just think that alone would be really bizarre. So I will probably redo them. Chances are I'll probably be teaching a different course and use that opportunity to refresh refresh my enthusiasm for teaching those particular courses. And the other aspect, of course, is will the material become out of date? And for most classes in the lifetime of, well, okay, that's a great question. I'm going to say that once things become out of date, you'll probably know, and by then you're probably ready to teach something new. But if it's a field that's moving fast, like what if you're teaching a class on machine learning or CRISPR and things change every week, then it becomes a real challenge, and you need to be able to be agile. Good point. Yep.
How do you feel about the relative worth of doing a pre-recorded lecture to an empty audience versus an in-class audience? And do you think time flexibility, like Netflix versus network, like being able to do an extra 10 minutes or less 10 minutes on a topic, is that a benefit?
That's a really good point. The question is, how do I feel about videos that are me talking to a classroom, or me talking in my office, or on a screencast that are recorded directly? So there are costs and benefits to doing both ways. One, in the case where I'm talking in front of, and I've done them both ways, where I'm talking to actual people, I have a better sense of, is what I'm saying coming across? Sometimes students will ask questions that the online audience is certainly thinking, and it's good that I'm addressing it at that point. The problem is, if you're going to do that, it's hard. You have to remember to repeat the question, otherwise you can't hear the question. Also, it takes, not every question will be not every question will lead the discussion in a way that you want it to go. While there are no bad questions, there may be distracting questions. There may be questions that I have to answer because I'm there, but because the camera's rolling, and I don't want to edit it out because it's going to cost me overnight to recompress the video, the students watching at home could get confused and say, oh, do I now have to worry about this concern raised by this particular student? The advantage of doing the class in your office or on a tablet is that you can have some lectures be more than an hour, some be 15 minutes. Having it be shorter than an hour makes it feel cheap to me. Having it be longer makes it feel unfair to the students, even though they're at home. That's my rather unevolved opinion of office-based lectures. Anything else? All right, thanks a lot.